back from Hawaii, and I see nobody's really brought any back to their tables, which is a bit of a shame. But, one glass over there. Hi, it's lovely to be here. My name is Jane Willis, and I run an arts organisation that uses creativity, the arts and design to develop innovative solutions to health and well-being. Well, that's quite grandiose. But we do work with the NHS and with other health partners to look at how we can improve healthcare environments and how we can develop creative approaches to support all sorts of different health and well-being issues. I believe passionately that creativity is probably the single biggest, most valuable, untapped natural resource that we all have at our disposal. And I think that it can have a truly transformative power. I'm going to talk to you tonight about dementia, very topical subject. And there is a lot of evidence now, robust academic research evidence, that creativity and the imagination is one of the very, very last cognitive abilities to decline when you have dementia. So if you develop dementia, it will get worse. There's no cure, there is no way of getting rid of it. You will get worse, you will decline. So the big question for people with dementia is how you support their quality of life while they live with dementia. But there is evidence that creativity is one cognitive ability that does not disappear. So I want to talk to you about how we can harness creativity to support people living with dementia. The Napkin Project is the project I'm going to use to explain that to you. The idea for the Napkin Project, as I think probably many of the best ideas do come from, it came when we weren't really looking for a project. We weren't trying to develop a project. It just sort of came by making connections, by having one idea and putting another idea with it, and then thinking, well, what if we added a bit of that? And, well, we also want to do that, so if we put it all together, what would that look like? And that's how the idea grew. We as a company, Willis had been invited by a dementia care home provider called Brunel Care to work with them to enhance the environment of a new dementia care home that they were building in Bristol. Typically, one would think that meant coming in and designing wallpapers or putting artworks up or thinking about how we could recreate street scenes from the 1940s to make it a pleasant environment. And if you think care home environments, then you're probably not far wrong if this is the kind of thing that you imagine. Chairs positioned around the edge of a room, a pretty horrendous carpet, very, very institutionalized feeling. If you were to take your parent or your loved one to such a place, I think you'd feel pretty bad about leaving them there. So you can see why we as artists and designers might be brought in to try and improve this environment. But this is actually not the problem. The environment is not the problem. The environment is quite easily solved, actually. There's lots of interior designers that can transform that. The problem is this. The problem is boredom, inactivity, which leads to the loss of identity, which leads to quite severe depression. These are all really side effects of dementia. And what we wanted to do was to use creativity to look at how we could actually improve the quality of life for people in care homes by developing ways in which they could actively be engaged in meaningful activity. So we invited two artists to work with us, Eamon O'Kane and Deirdre Nelson, and I'm really just going to talk to you about Deirdre's work. Deirdre came into the care home and she did a residency, so she spent time in the care home. Here, I haven't got a pointer thing and I can't quite make her out, but here she is, I can't point at the screen, how ridiculous. There she is standing up here, and she's knitting. She's got the care home knitting. She went in, she took her knitting, she got everybody knitting, and while they were knitting she talked to them and she found out about them and she asked them the question, what does home mean to you? And a lot of the residents in this particular care home didn't grow up in England. They were born and grew up in Somalia, in India, in the Caribbean, and they've ended up in their old age in central Bristol. So when they talked about their memories, the memories were not of what happened in the last 40 years. The memories went back to sort of 80, 70, 60 years ago. So they were talking about the home environments they remembered. And they talked about the fauna and flora, and in particular birds. So Deirdre created knitting patterns, and she knitted birds that people told her about, and they created a whole flock of migratory birds that these people remembered. And she taught the staff how to knit the birds, and she got everybody knitting birds. Now, what you probably don't realise is that people with dementia, they like to feel and stroke and touch. They get a great deal of pleasure out of that kind of sensory stimulation. So they would take the birds and they would cradle them, and they would take them to their rooms, and they would hang them on the coat stands that she designed for the units of the care home. And touch became quite important. Touch was one thing that Deirdre kept noticing again and again and again. And she ran all sorts of different workshops, and she realised how important reminiscence was, how important it was to be able to engage people in storytelling, in remembering their pasts and valuing those memories. So she created a series of cloth books where she sewed together both images and pictures from people's pasts and histories and cultures and backgrounds with different kinds of textiles, sari material, different kinds of cloths. And the residents could lay them on their lap and open them and leaf their way through the books. And they acted as a stimulus for conversation. So it gave relatives who were visiting something to talk about. It gave staff a way of communicating with the residents of the care home. But touch, we just kept coming back to touch. It just seemed really important and overlooked. And more than that, more than just overlooked, Deirdre noticed that residents would almost obsessively play with the edges of things. I don't know if any of you have relatives or have experience of people with dementia. There's an almost obsessive need to touch the edges of bedclothes, to play with the tablecloth. And the care homes all have napkins, real napkins. And the residents wouldn't just touch them and feel the edges of them like this, but they would take them and they would knot them together, and they would turn them into scarves, and they would pleat them, and they would put them on their heads, and they would walk around like this, pretending to be the captain of a ship, or they would fold them and they would collect things and put them in and tie them, and it would be a bag, and they would walk around them, or they would turn it into a doll and stroke the head of it. Sometimes relatives and staff would look at this and roll their eyes skyward and say, oh, I don't know what they're doing, away with the fairies. Deirdre looked at this and she went, that's creativity. That's them using their imagination in a really free and wonderful way, in a way that most of us forget to do beyond the age of about 5 or 6. And she said, this needs to be celebrated. We need to encourage people to be creative, and we need to get the care home staff to recognise that these residents aren't away with the fairies, they're actually tapping into an essential natural resource, their own creativity. So, the Napkin Project was born. We set up a blog. The whole project, it was run on a shoestring. It wasn't a project, there was no funding, nobody commissioned us to deliver it. It just seemed like a good idea with a lot of energy behind it. And despite spending a lot of time saying, oh, we really shouldn't be doing this, we really should be earning money, we really shouldn't be doing this, it just happened, and it's still happening. We set up a blog, we did it in-house, we spent no money on it. And through the blog, we put all sorts of links to articles about creativity and dementia. We told people about the residencies that we'd run in the care home. And we invited them to embroider a napkin. Now that one is one of Deirdre's trial ones that she used at one of her workshops. It's not particularly stunning, but we invited people to embroider a napkin. We said, email us, we'll send you a blank napkin, and we'll send you a luggage tab. We'd like you to reflect on what home means to you, and use that as inspiration to embroider a napkin. Send your napkin back to us, we'll collect them in, and we will gift them to the care home. We use social media, we use Twitter, Facebook, Flickr, all those modern things. And we actually managed to kind of mix up quite a storm. We had 10,000 visits to the blog. I've forgotten all the statistics about Twitter and Facebook. We had 20 different bloggers write about the project. We've had the project covered in The Guardian online. The project was selected as number 2 of all the Guardian online photo stories for the whole of last year. We had 268 people request napkins, and we had 120 returned. 120 might not seem like a huge amount, but the work that has gone into them is incredible. We ran some workshops with local community organisations, telling them about the project, telling them about creativity and dementia, and inviting them to learn an old skill, learn a new skill, pick up a needle and start embroidering. What was amazing about the project was this little thing where we invited people to reflect on what home means to you. Because what it's meant is that each of the napkins has a different image that resonates with people's, what they value about home. So there's all sorts of pictures, but the kinds of things that people told us that were important to them about home were love, comfort, security, safety, family, joy, creativity, nature, gardens. And all of those images are reflected in the kinds of things that people put on their napkins. And we took all the comments, we typed them up, and we did that clever little thing called a Wordle. But I'm really aware there are lots of digital experts and designers in the room who will think this is really quite basic. But, the other amazing thing that surprised us about the project, the other unforeseen impact, I think is what's called, is the impact the project had on the volunteers who embroidered the napkins. They wrote in, they emailed, they wrote blogs, they posted on Facebook to tell us how profoundly moved they had been by the project. So they were saying things like, my mother had dementia, my mother died of dementia, I spent the whole time thinking about my mother while I embroidered this napkin, and I'd like to gift it in her honour. See, I feel even quite emotional talking about it. They said, it's really reminding me how the little things make a big difference. I'm going to go out and make sure I look for opportunities to do little things that make a big difference. They told us all sorts of moving stories about why the project benefited them, how they had felt better because they were doing something for other people, how it had energized them because they'd learned a new skill or that they were doing something creative. We had an exhibition of all the napkins in a local health and wellbeing centre, and we invited participants to come and have a look at everything that they'd created. And then we had a special tea party at the care home where we gifted the 120 napkins to the care home, and the staff were overwhelmed. The residents made a beeline for the napkins. The staff were overwhelmed by the idea that all these people in the wider community who they didn't know had taken the time and effort to make these beautiful objects and had sent them as a gift to them. I think often staff in all sorts of healthcare facilities, and care homes in particular, can feel quite demoralised, quite isolated, quite worn down by the job that they have to do. So for them to feel that there was this community of support, the project connected them to their wider communities, to community organisations, to embroidery groups, to WI groups. So it's given them access to a source of future volunteering and longer term support. And of course the napkins themselves, we have kept 3 back. We didn't want to keep many back, but you know, this just goes to show how many common themes there are. Keep the home fires burning while your hearts are yearning. And somebody else here has embroidered home, keep the home fires burning. Now this is a fantastic reminiscence resource. So somebody picks this, they lay it on their lap, they feel it, and it just starts with that. It starts with touch. But then you can have a conversation about that. Did you have a fire when you were growing up? Where did you keep the coal? Do you remember getting sent down to the coal cellar to draw it out? Oh, what happened in the war? You know, you can have, from this one image, you can have the most amazing conversations with people. And I think this is the true creative resource for the care homes. But the question for us now, I suppose, is where do we go next with this? Because it seems to me that it has generated a huge amount of interest. It's grown from nothing. It wasn't really a project, it was something that happened despite itself. There's been incredible collaboration between the care home, the artists behind the project, different community organisations, and all of those volunteers who've contributed the napkins and written about the project. That it seems like there's an energy and appetite and interest to do more. I've had emails from organisations in Canada saying, how do we set a napkin project up? We want to do it here. I've had people in Luton want to do it. I've had somebody in Gloucestershire want to do it. So our question is, how do we scale this up? How do we develop it? How do we make it accessible to older adult environments, hospital environments and care homes across the country in a way that's free and accessible and works, basically? So I'd like to leave you with two thoughts. One is, if anybody would like to be involved in stage 2 of the napkin project in any way whatsoever, then let me know. And we'll see what happens. I don't really know what will happen next. We have some ideas, but the other thought really is to go back to that idea of creativity. Creativity isn't, I believe, creativity is not just about painting a picture or singing a song or writing a play or all of those artistic activities. They involve creativity. But creativity is about the connections that we make. It's about the way we solve problems. It's about how we collaborate. It's about how we communicate with other people. Creativity should be about the way we live our lives, and I'm reminded of the opening address this morning from, I think, Ray, who talked about open. There has to be an openness to connect, collaborate, to solve problems, to turn things on their head and look for connections that perhaps seem a bit weird and unusual, like the exercise that we've just done. So really, support the Napkin Project, but please think about creativity as the biggest untapped resource that we all have, whatever we want to achieve in life. Thank you.